9 years, 2014-ish. Been in Kensington in Brooklyn for 6 years, about. Almost exactly 6 years.
Was that a work-related move?
No, I lived in Montreal for like 10 years. And me and my wife were like, we love Montreal, but we're ready to not live here. And New York is not the most random place to move to, but it was essentially random. And then we really liked it.
Being spread out all over the country, it seems like it can be difficult when the time comes to, do an album or tour.
Yeah. I mean, now we're all in New York. Now my band is like, actually now we're between Brooklyn and Beacon.
Oh, well, that's a 30-minute trade right there.
Well, it's farther than you think. I feel like going across New York City is longer in many ways than a lot of trips within the continental U.S.
I get my Los Angeles friends if I'm meeting up with people on the west side and they live on the east side. I totally understand not wanting to cross Los Angeles, anywhere near rush hour. But New York, we've got this wonderful subway system, and it goes pretty much, more or less everywhere, and at least four of the five boroughs. But yet, me asking somebody to come out to Queens, it would be like me asking somebody to get on a plane and fly to see me.
No, I have friends in Queens that I've never been to their place because as the crow flies, it's like 19 minutes, but it's like 95 minutes.
Beacon seems like it would be a pretty good place to ride out of the pandemic. It was tough for me. I live in a one bedroom. It was hard being in New York, and you've got a family. I imagine that must have driven you up the walls.
Yeah, it was very intense. Particularly the spring, just when New York was like when New York was so intense, like right when it started. And it was, we have 3 kids. We have twins who are 2 and an 8-year-old. So we were getting like a second grader home from school, like doing a second grader doing TV school, which was horrible. Well, just like computer school, like online school, but being 8 years old and like on a laptop. No, just horrible. I mean, the teachers did their best; they were great, but it was just not a great circumstance. We were very lucky, and we have like a little yard in the back, and we're relatively near the park. But for a while, in that spring, you couldn't even go to the park. Like they had closed off the parks, which was and I even took my 8-year-old out a couple times to the parade grounds, and we were kicking a ball, and the ball would go past some other people, and they'd be about to throw it back, and you'd be like, never mind, we'll come get it. Step back. For just in that March, April, May was so crazy. And then it was a year of hangover from that. And then it'll come out again, I'm sure, periodically throughout my life. When my kids go off to school, they'll be like, why are you being so crazy? And I'll be like, why am I being so crazy? Oh, it's the pandemic. That's why I'm being so crazy to you right now. But anyway, to take this can of tomatoes.
The psychological impact that you're carrying?
Yeah, I think so. I think it'll come out at some point. But again, we were ultimately fine. And we were very lucky, and we were lucky to be able to stay home. And on the balance, it was lovely to spend so much time with the family, with my kids. It's not to say it wasn't, it was very difficult, but on the balance, it was a net positive. But it was, sure was kooky.
I've heard some kind of bummer stories from people who are touring all the time and miss these really important moments in their children's formative years. And at very least, one of the things this did was force you, that sounds bad, but it did. It forced you to be around and to see everything.
Yeah. I mean, when I was in Arcade Fire, it was always relatively civilized. I mean, we kept it relatively civilized, and we would tour and then take breaks, and touring we were never that dedicated to life on the road. We were very fortunate to be able to make it work that way. But that was like a long stretch of, uh, of chilling out, of uptight chilling out.
How aware were the twins that something strange was happening?
I don't think they were very aware. They were two and they had each other. So they weren't even like, I think it was hard for people. I mean, even, we have lots of friends with one kid, and I think that was probably stranger because their kid wasn't hanging out with any other kids. And our kids were at least hanging out with two other kids, and the twins had each other. And
an 8-year-old hanging out with a 2-year-old, if that.
No, Alvin, my oldest Alvin, did not have that much fun. He did not enjoy his pandemic, and the twins were blissfully unaware, and they played with each other. And it wasn't, it was basically no biggie for them. And but we had friends with kids that age who didn't have other kids around, and they have speech developmental delays and stuff because you're just not chatting with other kids and chatting or with other grown-ups and stuff. I mean, they're good parents, but it's just when you're completely isolated from society, it'll strange things happen. But yeah, our 8-year-old, now 11-year-old, did not enjoy it until, it was 6 months, and then he started playing baseball that fall, that October, 6-7 months in. And that was great because that's standing in a field 20 feet apart from everyone. Then that's how you play the game. That's the nature of the game. So it was extremely normal. And he was playing baseball with his friends, and it was and you're throwing the ball 20 feet anyway. So it that was a completely normal experience. And that was the start of it.
He was in the outfield.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you bring up a good point, and maybe it's something that isn't. I mean, I'm sure if you have kids, it's something that you and the other parents discuss a lot. But for kids in high school, I understand how incredibly difficult that must have been. Missing your prom and missing all these formative things. But socializing and learning social skills is such a big part of those younger grades.
The kids that were in kindergarten and first grade, I think, got the raw deal, right when you learn how to walk in line, learn how to just dealing with being in a room with 20 people is such a social skill. And and those kids that missed that got the raw deal. I mean, Alvin didn't have the most fun. Being a second grader and he had a pretty bummer year, but yeah, there were a lot of kids that were just really would have benefited from hanging with people. And I mean, and I don't mean that in any political sense. That is not a comment on I feel I need to put an asterisk this is not a comment on policy. This is just me.
No,
no. I wouldn't have done any better.
Everybody who went through it understands what you're talking about.
Everyone was doing not everyone was doing their best, but a lot of people were doing their best.
Now that you're in a band with your wife, how does touring work?
So we just did 3 weeks in Europe, and for that stretch, my parents came down, and they just got totally hammered by all the fall school colds. They just got everybody got pink eye, and people were throwing up, and it was
nobody
intense.
has immunities anymore.
Yeah, but we for a couple stretches before we hired a babysitter that we've known since before we had kids, and we hired and Jenny's sister Julie is also in the band, and her husband, who mixed my record, he's a great uncle. He stayed with the kids this last weekend. We were doing a weekend of shows, and he stayed with the kids, and he's great. Good uncle. So yeah, family and babysitters, and it was an experiment. The twins are 5 now, so it feels possible. And everyone's in school, and when that's cruising, the weekdays just fly by. But it was an experiment, and it worked. I was oh, okay, we can do this. because we had never done it before.
I talked to parents in bands who have taken their kids both at a very young age, but also sort of later when they're actually like understand what's going on, have taken them on tour with them. Is that something that you would ever do?
Yeah, I would do. It depends. I mean, it's honestly just like a cost calculation and a space calculation. It's like, how many seats do we have in the van? Like, and how many hotel rooms do we need to get? But no, I mean, Alvin, again, our oldest Alvin, and is interested in that. And if the timing was right, I wouldn't hesitate to bring him out. But yeah, it's like van tour is pretty hot and heavy. It's not, it's not good for a young person's bones.
He's old enough to appreciate what the two of you do for work.
Yeah. Yeah. He's old enough and he's thoughtful enough. And he is, he's interested in the world. And actually he minded more that we were gone. Like we were gone for 3 weeks and the 5-year-olds kind of didn't bat an eye. They just were like, which is not true of all 5-year-olds. Some would just break down every day, but they didn't bat an eye. And he was like, he kind of missed the emotional support. I mean, my parents are great. They're great grandparents, but like he just having his mom and dad, he was like, oh, I missed that. Like you guys get me. So he's a preteen. He's not a teenager yet. It'll be different when he's 14.
It's angst, but it's a different kind of angst. It's
yeah.
Pre-angst.
Yeah, it's pre-angst.
You come from a musical family for several generations, it seems like.
Yeah. Yeah, my mom is a harpist and a musician and a jazz harpist and rock and roll piano player. And her parents were musicians. Her mom was a singer in a singing group with her sisters called the King Sisters. They were born, their last name was originally Driggs, but they changed it to King for showbiz. Their dad's name was King anyway. And then my mom's dad was like Albino Ray.
Andrew sisters kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like 4-part harmony, jazz harmonies. And my grandma Louise, she married my grandpa. His name's Albino Ray. He was born Alvin McBurney, but changed his name to Alvino Ray. Guitar player, big band leader. And then, yeah, my grandma grew up in like a pre-depression, like itinerant, entertaining family, like driving across the American West in like the 1920s, like doing church shows and proto vaudeville with her dad, who was, just her dad was like, we're a family band now. And that was, and he was born in 1880s Utah or something like that. Just like real hardcore life.
Oh, so they were like pioneering Mormons?
Yeah.
Early
days? My great grandpa, King Driggs, was like the last son of the second wife of like a polygamist homesteader, like in desert Utah, like in small town Utah, like farmer rancher guy. And then he wanted to be a musician and got married and had kids and was like kind of a failed composer and music teacher, and then turned his family into a family band. And I don't know that it was that successful, but they did it. Like they like my grandma wrote a memoir, and like between the lines, you can feel how rough it was. It's like, and then like Daddy got thrown in prison for I don't know what, and you're like, you know what he got thrown in prison for. You're just like, what was going on, Grandma?
Maybe it's a case of like being more willing to tell more about yourself and not wanting to reveal things other people don't necessarily want revealed.
And it was interesting. I mean, it's also genuinely complicated. Like it is like genuinely a happy story with a happy ending where they became like famous singers. They like grew up in this family band, and then the sisters became famous singers, and like brought the family up out of poverty, and they loved each other, and it was great. But it's also extremely complicated and very human, and like there was like definitely a toll. I mean, it's kind of like everything in the 20th century, where it's like there's like a massive human toll, particularly on the women, that was just like completely unspoken, and for a lot of women was just like they were just like, that's the bargain, like that's what it is. You know what I mean? Like she, because that's the world she lived in. She was very happy with it, or for whatever that means. But yeah, no, I mean, very complicated, but ultimately like a happy ending, but still like a very complicated story.
So your mom was juggling a music career and children at the same time?
Yeah, it was not as intense. Like when I was a baby, like she was playing nightclubs and stuff. I was born in Northern California, like half an hour outside of Reno. So my mom was playing like nightclubs in Reno and like Tahoe and stuff when I was 2 or 3, before I remember. And then by the time I was alive, we were living in suburban Texas, and she wasn't super active, but she was doing concerts in schools, and she made a couple records within my memory, but it was not as hardcore as when in the early 80s when I was really young, or before. I mean, before that, she was like a studio musician in LA, and like had a rock band in the late 60s, like when she was in her 20s.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And yeah, so there was not the most intense phase of that for her. And partly it was because we were in suburban Texas, and it's not like there were like oodles of opportunities to play music. I think she would have probably wanted to play more music, but was in suburban Texas, which I was also not aware of as a youth.
When the kids grew up and moved out, did she kind of rekindle that part of her?
A little bit, not a ton. My parents moved to Maine. My dad's from Maine. My dad grew up in Maine. My mom is from LA, and it's so physically beautiful where they live. And that was always kind of my mom's. Like my mom grew up in showbiz, and she kind of, again, it very complicated, where it's like both wanted to do it, but also knew it very intimately and didn't want to do it, but also wanted to do it, but also didn't want to do it, but also knew it very intimately, but also knew it very intimately. And so they moved to Maine. When we were in college, they moved to Maine, which is less rock and roll than suburban Texas even. But she's always stayed active. She's always recorded things and made records, and if nothing else, played the harp in church and stuff like that. But no, not playing gigs that much. But it, I think in a perfect world she would have it all. But she was very willing to be like, I'm happy to live in a beautiful place. Like there's like water here and like a little bit of mountain. Like this is pretty good.
When you were younger, your mother having been in and around show business, did they encourage you or dissuade you when it came to actually trying to pursue music professionally?
No, I mean, as best as I can tell, it just made it extremely normal that I would play music. When I was in college, I took a semester off. My sophomore year, I took my spring. We actually did trimesters. So I took my spring trimester off and went to Montreal to be in Arcade Fire. And there was a lot of families that would be like, absolutely not. Like, you are in school to be an engineer. But like, my family was like, oh, that makes sense that you would play music. And they weren't expecting any success or anything, but like, it was My dad's a geologist, but he knows my mom's family really well, and he knows my mom really well, obviously.
So they were both into rock, but different kinds.
Exactly. Go to hell. Get out of here. His interview's over.
I wouldn't blame you. It was pretty terrible.
But yeah, so as best as I can tell, it just made it extremely normal. And, I'm not particularly technically talented, but I'm very musical. Like I just grew up so deeply exposed to music that it did give me the skill set to make good music, whether it's nature and nurture.
How do you sort of differentiate technical skill with musicality?
I mean, technical skill is training, and it's just like hours at a keyboard or a guitar, or it's getting taught in a specific way. And musicality is a bit more instinct and like moving to the music and feeling the beat. It's like just feeling the music and having good instincts. But like, you can if you have good instincts, you can like sit in an organ and play two notes on an organ and add something to a song. But you can't play an amazing organ solo, but you can like contribute. If you're a dancer, like my band, Sister Squares, is all people that are basically people that are dancers who are never like technically, they took like high school band, but they're so musical, like they can just slot into music in a way that it's not like they can't do like runs on a keyboard, but they respond to music. And then as long as you can produce something in response to music, then it all works out.
I haven't heard anyone really describe it that way in the sense of, I mean, obviously dancing and music are very interrelated, but there being some transferable skills between the two. Having a band, I mean, obviously not entirely, but having a band with several non-musicians, how does that impact the music?
I mean, it kind of depends on what kind of music you're making. I've always made it from like it's vaguely in the punk rock tradition. And the true punk rock tradition is not even musical, just like complete idiot. Like I'm a complete idiot. Blah. And there's something amazing in that. There's something very naive, and can be very powerful in that. And so the bar is anything. It's like the bar is a John Cage dropping a toaster on a tile floor is music.
Like a Duchamp kind of.
Yeah. So it's like we're starting like that's the bar, is that like Sid Vicious is music and dropping a toaster on a tile floor is music. And so that's the tradition that the music I make comes from, basically. And so if you can hold a beat, then it's great. And like, I remember early days, Miles Francis in my band is an amazing drummer. And one of the first times we played together as a band, it was Julie Shore was playing synth keyboard. Like she's a piano player, but she's never played bass or anything. But I was like, this synthesizer sounds good on bass. Like you play bass. And Miles was playing drums. And Miles was so pleased to play with someone who was playing bass that they just hadn't been taught any rules or anything about what it means to be a bass player. So it's just like, oh, this feels right, or this feels right. But it's not like you have to match it with the kick drum and like leave space for this. It's just like, what? This feels kind of cool, and this feels bad, and this feels cool. And just, if you're musical, then it develops into something. And sometimes if it's not musical, it still develops into something pleasing. But those are different genres. Like it just means that it's nice to not be aware of it's nice for there to be some sort of naivete. I mean, I always respond to that, some sort of naivete.
There's a pretty steep learning curve, I would imagine.
Well, I mean, but no, I mean, Julie's a great piano player, so playing, so she can play. It's just one note. Same, and everyone in the band is such. And Miles is a true drum. Like Miles has been playing drums since they were 5 or whatever, and everyone's an amazing singer. They all took like chorus, and they've all done musicals and stuff. So everyone's like an amazing singer. And is a can read. They're not like I've never written anything out, but they can like read music. They've all taken 5 years of piano lessons or done high school band. Like it's not from nothing. It's not from nothing. But not technically proficient. Not again, except Julie can play Julie is like a piano player. Like Julie plays Chopin and play guitar, like it's not that naive, but just not music school. But I mean, Miles went to music school. Like it's not a dig against music school. It's just like not trained in that sense.
I assume you were being a little hyperbolic with the dropping a toaster on the floor thing, because you do obviously, you have standards when it comes to like what you're putting your name on.
Yeah. I mean that more just like in the tradition, like that's the side of the ledger that I'm coming from. Because there's other ways, like there's so many ways to come to music. Like you can come to music from practicing violin from age 4, and there's something astounding about that. Or you can come to music by being raised in the church and doing church every Sunday and singing in the church choir and becoming a soloist. Like that's a way to come to music. And like I came to music growing up with a musician mom, but my philosophy was as a teenager is a little bit more like, what is a human again? I guess I'm going to do this, and I'm human, and this is part of being human, is making this sound, beep boop beep boop beep boop. Like it's just like
creating music being an essential part of the human condition.
Yeah, just like a little bit more philosophical. Like it's coming from a bit more of a philosophical place, which I'm not recommending. It's just kind of the path that it took to get there. Like it's I'm trying to think of anyway, I'm just trying to describe what I see our genre as being. If that makes sense.
It's obviously very abstract in a way, to try to. There's obvious labels you can give to music, but to describe the approach and to describe, I guess, as the kids say, like the vibe is an entirely different conversation.
Yeah. No, I mean, like it's like making a record is making this weird document, and it's making electrons shake in a specific way and recording those electrons. And that's what and at some level, I think of that when I'm making a record. And some people, when they think of making a record, is like, I'm making a song and I'm making a perfect song. And then we're capturing that, which is a great way to think of it. But I'm thinking of it a bit more in the tradition of dropping a toaster on a tile floor, but it's not that exactly, but it is, if that makes sense. I don't even think that is a John Cage piece, but
he came from a musical background, and he had, was incredibly musically gifted, but started.
He's an extremist, and I don't support his extremist ideals. I reject them.
I think compositions should have music in them, or, I guess what I'm having trouble squaring a little bit there is what it means to take a scientific approach, and how looking at the music production process as vibrating atoms, how that plays into your approach.
It's It's scientific, maybe in just like like in a Socratic method kind of science, where you're just like where it's kind of starting from first principles each time. We're like, what is a drum? This is the drum. Like, tell me, Monasthenes, like, what do you think music is? Like, I think you must clap on the 2 and 4 for music. Ah, yes, Monasthenes, but what do you think of,
So you're kind of reconceptualizing the band or the music every time?
yeah, but not, I mean, we're also a band. Like, we're also just like playing tunes. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess I'm describing my philosophical approach to it, which is different than like my practical approach to it. Like the practical approach to it sometimes is pick up a guitar or pick up a drum machine. And, at this point, I've played guitar for 20 years. Like I'm not a naive guitar player by any stretch. Like I'm a person who's played guitar for 20 years, even though I don't think of myself as a guitar player.
20 years, I mean, that's, I may be, my memory is bad, but 20 years seems to be about the timeline for Arcade Fire starting. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you picked up the guitar specifically for Arcade Fire?
I mean, I didn't play guitar on Arcade Fire. No, I mean, I played bass. I got a bass when I was in eighth grade, and I took piano lessons in first grade. Um, but I was never a guitar player. I played guitar on tour on one song with Arcade Fire. I played acoustic guitar on the song Haiti, uh, which I played in a fairly naive way. But it's just like 20 years on from that. It's like, oh, I've been playing guitar for 20 years now. Like it's no longer naive. Now it's like, it's a method.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that those two things kind of coincided in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, you were getting serious and joining a band, so you wanted to, it sounds like, explore other musical avenues.
Is that true? No. Again, it was just like it's just the tools at hand. It was just like making music with the tools at hand. And again, like I took piano lessons and I'm like fifth generation musician. So it is not a Sid Vicious situation by any stretch, but it's more inspired by that than learning scales. But I did learn scales at a certain point. I mean, I'm not good at them, but I could play you an E flat scale, which Sid Vicious couldn't do.
Is there an extent to, I mean, this is a silly question, but like, is there extent to which just being from a musical family gives you a head start?
It's not a coincidence. Like, I don't think it's a coincidence. And it's hard to like parse out exactly what it is, what the advantage is.
You haven't lived another life, so yeah, obviously it's tough to do
Yeah.
one to one.
No, but it's not like my grandfather had like label connections that got us in with Merge Records, the indie label in North Carolina. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't a classic like nepotism angle, but it is like growing up in a family of woodworkers and you know how to whittle pretty good. and then you're like oh, I'm a whittler now. Like I'm a professional whittler. Like there is an aspect of that it's a little bit is, as best as I can tell, it's a little bit skill and it's a little bit comfort with the materials and it's a lot of just, again, not there not being a barrier. Like I think there's like a conceptual barrier to being an artist or being a musician for a lot of people, and there's like a straight up, it's hard when someone tells you not to do something. It's hard to then do it, even if it's in a casual way. Where it's like you can't be a musician. Like that to me is that it was just normal made it infinitely easier in a way that's like difficult to comprehend what advantage that was, because it just made it normal. It's like a default. I mean, it's like going to college. Like being a first generation college kid is different than being a third generation college kid, because it's like, oh, it's normal to go to college. And when you're a first generation college kid, it's like, and I'm a third generation college kid, so it's like, oh, this is normal. And you obviously you go to school and you get a diploma, and you just, there's something very normal about it that is not, that it's hard to articulate every aspect of it. And there are aspects of it that are easy to articulate, but every aspect of it is like a little bit, it gets a little bit more mysterious, but is obviously there. Like, it's not a coincidence that like it's 4 generations in of people being musicians. It's like, it makes a lot of sense.
It's a very serious thing, and it seems that you're taking the music very seriously if you're like moving to another country to play in a band.
Yeah. Though again, it's just in your 20s. People do all sorts of things in their 20s.
This was you like saying like, hey, this is my shot. Like, let's do this, and let me put everything into this thing.
It was, honestly, it was more casual than that. It was more like, doing this now. And that's partly why it was so easy. Like, that's partly the ease I was talking about, where it's like, oh, I'm just going to do this. And everyone was like, okay, cool. Like, it wasn't that casual, but it was my journey to it. Again, my journey to it was remarkably casual, I would say. Like, there was no plan. It didn't feel planned at all. It just felt like an expression.
So you went back to school in 2017?
Mm-hmm.
Was that a backup? You know, what were you thinking about doing something other than music for a while?
No, I had no plans to do things other than music. There were a bunch of reasons why I went back to school. On a selfish level, I just wanted to turn on that part of my brain. Like, I am a school person. Like, I'm a reader and a writer and I enjoy school, and I wanted, I was turning 30. This was 2015. So I was 30, no, it was 2016. I went back in 2016. So I was 34, and I was like, oh, I feel like my brain is still flexible enough that I could learn something here. And Arcade Fire was very heavily engaged with Partners in Health, this great organization that's kind of revolutionized healthcare, and just is a very moral organization, and has just like saved millions of lives. Like, in a nutshell, like Partners in Health basically pioneered AIDS treatment in rural places and multi-drug resistant tuberculosis treatment in rural places, particularly Haiti, but also Peru, and just proved that you could treat poor people like normal people, and they would get better like normal people. Like, they were just like, how about we give them medicine? Oh, it worked. Like, everyone go fuck yourselves.
Bare minimum stuff.
But I was also like, oh, okay, I feel like I could be more useful, both if I knew more and if I was more accredited. Then, like, if I have like a Grammy and like a master's degree from Harvard, I feel like I can like cut to the front of some conversations and just be like a more effective advocate. And also can learn, like, it's very easy to not be helpful in a policy front. And it's very easy to, like, if you're a band engaged in charity at all, to do negative things in the world. And I was like, oh, I should both learn more, but also I can be more effective if I'm, to the extent that assholes care about credentials, let me get that credential. And then I can at least, like, those barriers will disappear. And also just selfishly, like, this will be good for my brain, and like, it'll be nice to like make some new friends in a completely random circumstance, and engage with the world on a different place. And At the time, I was extremely philosophically against an MFA, like against like doing a writing program or doing something like that. I was very against. Now I'm less against it. Now I've softened in my old age. I don't know, just like oh, you can't teach art that way, blah blah blah, whatever. And now I'm like, oh, actually, that's kind of great. Uh, and I was like, wow, I mean, I wasn't even a jerk to anyone about it. It was a privately held belief in my head. But I was like, oh, I want to go back to school. Like, I'm not doing an MFA. And now I'm like, oh, I could have done that too. That would have been fun. But I wanted to do something orthogonal to arts, like with the aim of like learning about the world in a different way as like an arts education, where it's like, oh, like I went to the Kennedy School for Public Policy, and I was like, oh, learning deeply about public policy, I think will actually impact my art in a way that like just focusing on craft, it'll just be different. And it did, and it was great. And it's great to like learn how the world works in a different way and like spend a year like reading research papers and learn how to read a research paper and like learn like get some of that, if you really focus for a year on something, it gets into your mind in a different way than if you just pick it up slowly. And so it was great. And it ended up being the year that Trump got elected. So it was a very interesting time to be in a public policy school. Like it was a very rich time to be like at a place analyzing what's going on in the world.
I gotta say, it's funny now with some removed from it, but in the process of like, I was reading some interviews that you did, and I found one from 2015 with The Guardian. And you were so hopeful. You're like, oh, Obama's in. Like, I think things are trending up, and it's just wild. And then, bam.
Yeah,
we kind of hit a wall right there.
Yeah, no, and I went into school a bit more like being like, oh, public policy, for better or worse, it's kind of a video game, and this will help me get better at this video game. And then Trump got elected, and it was like, it's not a fucking video game, mate. You're like, oh shit, right. This is not a video game.
Measurable impact on people's lives.
Yeah. And also the inputs and outputs are not numbers. It's like the inputs and outputs are extremely messy and extremely heavy. So it's like, it was a good environment to at least start thinking in those terms.
It might have been the same interview. You mentioned Moby Dick, and during the pandemic, I went back and reread Moby Dick. I'd read it. Actually, yeah, I probably can't say it. I'd read it during high school, and I don't think I really got the whole thing because it's a wild book. It's disparate. It's like there's just like chapters of and like encyclopedic stuff, much of which is very, very wrong, but I think that's kind of the point in some places. It's also like a very gay book, which is something that I don't feel like gets commented on a lot.
It's amazing. And
it is obviously Melville wrote a lot of great things, but it is a very singular work, at least in the English language, in terms of how the book is structured. And you said something along the lines of, my goal is to make music or to make art be like Moby Dick. And I'm wondering how something like Moby Dick influences the art you make.
Yeah. And that is a reason like why I was in school, where it is that encyclopedic epic sense of the world. But also it's like, my experience of Moby Dick is that it's like 100% deadly serious and 100% kidding, and just like it's everything at 100%. It's like really funny and really heartfelt and very detached and ironic, but like also like the most spiritual thing. It's like all of the things at once. Like like in some ways it's very detached, but it's not it's not a modern ironic detachment. It's like a very passionate thing as well. And that was a quality which I'm not directly pursuing now, but I still am a little bit, where like in performance, you want to be like, I was never a drinker. Now I will have like a glass of wine, but I was never a drinker. But I wanted to be like 100% drunk, Bacchus style drunk living, and 100% analytical and sober at the same time. Where just like Dionysian release and total analytical commitment to what was going on, which is that's kind of Moby Dick as well. Just like a bacchanal, but also so technical and so in the head, but also just like, and I'm still, that is still very appealing to me, where it's like something just very powerful and spiritual and just completely unleashed, but with enough technical rigor to be comprehensible to the outside world. and then to produce a text that is rich enough that you can return to it, like Moby, I've got a play up in New York right now that I did the music for. It's called Stereophonic. It's written by this playwright David Adjemi, and it's really great. And almost everyone I know who's gone to see it has loved it, and it's amazing. But even the people that I know that I respect that haven't liked it, it's still a very richly analyzable text. Like, they still can't stop talking about it. And there's something that's very appealing to me, that just like a true eruption, but that is analyzable, that you can play the parts against each other. It's definitely something I pursue.
You use the word spiritual to describe aspects of Moby Dick, and I saw you were discussing reading a lot of Emily Dickinson during the pandemic, and said something along the lines of the romantic and the religious are almost inseparable in that work. You know, you grew up in the church to a certain extent. Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. So at this point, how would you say that spirituality plays a role and is present in the work you make, and how much of that is a conscious decision?
I mean, the way I talk about it is just like, my big old monkey brain relates to it this way. Like, my big old monkey brain gets the feelies when this happens. And it's probably just my monkey brain, but like, this is how my body and what feels like my spirit responds to this. And that it responds, and it's still fundamentally like even in this world of fact checking and whatever, like, we're still just fundamentally going on our gut when we decide when something is true. We're like, it is fundamentally like, oh, I believe it. Like, it's not like Einstein is, the reason I believe Einstein is because, like, fundamentally at some level, I'm just like, okay, sure, I'll go with that.
You can't be an expert in everything. And to a certain extent, you have to trust the experts in those things, but it's the decision of who to trust and why.
And to me, those decisions, for lack of a better word, are fundamentally spiritual, when you're just deciding what is true. You're like, this is true and this isn't true. And then when you're making art, the inputs are probably from my childhood, and the inputs are from the culture around me, and the inputs are flawed and they're very contingent. But still, when I'm making a song, it's still like, does this feel true? Does this feel not true? Does this feel transcendent? Does this not feel transcendent? And like, when I'm away from the process, you can like definitely analyze it, and you can, it's very easy to figure out what adds up all the vectors as to why you feel that way. But in the moment, you kind of have to like give into your monkey brain and be like, this is true. And that to me is the, very flawed spiritual core of what I'm doing. It's like, is this true? Is this not true? Is this true? Is this not true? Like, and it's not actually in my heart. It's here, and it's whatever I was reading, and it's whatever my parents told me when I was 7 and I accidentally believed was true. But nevertheless, it remains that I have some response to it. And so might as well, that's all I got. So I got to go with it a little bit.
Gonna lay my body down. beneath the leaves. Speak loud enough, or speak loud.